Hey guys, Mike here from Lunch Money Comics. Today I'm at the East of the River Comics and Collectible Show in Enfield, Connecticut. Let's go find some comic books. Cool. Nice. All right. Cool. Wow.
Yeah, here, let's...
Wow. I'll get to look at some nice stuff here. Wow.
Oh.
I have some friends who would be into that. What? Oh, really?
The other label. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a 5.5? Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. Well, I know you.
Yeah, I know you too.
Hey, man.
It has the archival paper, so...
That's crazy.
It's freaking crazy, and it's not that pricey as I expected.
I want this. I'll buy it right now, right?
Okay, yeah.
Good for you, man. Good for you. Awesome. Wow, that's beautiful too. Look at that. Look at the condition of this book too.
I love that. I can't believe it. That's one of the most iconic covers.
Yeah.
So is that.
I was gonna say if you were gonna get, I have a buddy of mine.
And that's
who
just
would have been
the
down
title,
there.
The Murderous Gangster.
Yeah, exactly. But
I just like that one. The
that's awesome.
ogre.
Yeah. Oh, that's hideous. Yeah.
And that's early Black Tarantula. I was telling you guys too, it's half price the sticker, so if it's 30, it's $15.
Do you know if you have any?
I do, yeah, it's mixed in. I don't know where.
What's your outfit?
It's a Golden Age artist.
This one is my favorite.
Yeah, he's cool.
It's
Good
just
stuff.
Those old staples, they get a little black, not a rusty. Is that the start of rust though? That little black dot you start seeing?
right because they were out there.
I'm talking about, you see it on some of them. Oh no, that's rust.
That one's
Right
my
there.
favorite.
But you see this black dot? Like there's like little, it starts to get like black little dots in lines. I don't know if that's... Yeah, it probably makes sense.
Awesome.
Yeah, it would only make sense for us as a bundle.
Yeah. And what I'll do is I'll call you right now, and you can put me in as Greg Comments. Yeah, and remind me, because Oh, absolutely. I got a warehouse full of this.
Yeah, no, my father used to own the military ship that was on the border turnpike.
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, that's me right there.
$3. Pretty cool though. I had that one.
Is there an Iron Man thing in here?
I have an Iron Man here.
Oh!
Yeah, he's $35. Yes, maybe I can give him on the deal line. Just remember I'm here.
Yep, okay. Sound good? So keep it in the back of your mind.
Prices, I think these are all in really bad condition. Yeah, bummer. Nice.
Hi.
Never seen that before.
We got like one or two graded ones.
Cool.
Most of our wings are graded, so
What's the best you can do on the demon in a bottle? Josh, what do you got, buddy?
I got this X-Men, original X-Men action figures.
Oh man,
I love this stuff.
I've never seen this before. When is this from? I don't even know.
Marvel Collector's Edition.
Huh. Sweet. Yeah, keep it in the box.
Yeah, man.
All right, cool.
Love it.
Nice pickup. So we have an Avengers one here. Oh, that's sweet. Comes with ants. Of course it does. Oh, it's cool. Old school Iron Man. That's cool. Hulk's so tiny. If I film it, I'll remember.
I am so busy. I
right.
know I will.
All right, I owe Cliff $15 for this. All right, deal. Excited to have
No,
it.
you
Thanks,
only
Cliff.
owe me $10.
$10? What a deal. Thanks, Cliff. I appreciate that. It's awesome. All right, guys. So that was a pretty cool little show. I didn't spend a lot of money, but I got some excellent, awesome books to add to my collection. Let's go home. I'll show you guys what I found. So there you go. That was the East of the River comic book and collectible show in Enfield, Connecticut. Now, usually on this day, the last Sunday of the month in Connecticut, we have the monthly CliffCon. It's a show I always try to go to. Well, in this case, at least for this month, it was temporarily replaced by this East of the River show. But because of that, it was very similar in a lot of ways. You know, similar size, medium to smallish, and a lot of the same vendors. But despite its smaller size, you guys saw from the footage, there were some pretty big books there, and people were absolutely buying them. Not me so much. If you've watched any of my recent videos, you will have known that I've spent a little bit more lunch money than I'm used to. So I definitely have set a pretty conservative budget on myself for these sorts of things. I always set a budget. It helps me stay focused, make sure, you know, I get the books I absolutely want, and also make sure that I hunt for deals. People often tell me, you know, comic book shows are overpriced. Maybe the bigger ones, but in my experience, the smaller ones, I always get great deals. So I set a budget for $100. And I sort of stuck to it. But you guys will see, the books I got for that $100 were pretty awesome. I got some pretty great deals. So before I show you guys what I got, you know the drill. If you want to support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, follow me on Instagram under Lunch Money Comics IG. So the first book I want to show you is actually the last one you saw in the footage. I just mentioned CliffCon. Well, the guy who runs that, Cliff, was also at this show, but not as a coordinator, as a vendor. And I tell you guys, he didn't have a huge selection, but we must have very similar taste because I loved everything he had. I saw this book, I've wanted it for a while, and I had to have it. This is the Marvel graphic novel #1, The Death of Captain Marvel. It is from 1982, art and story by Jim Starlin. Now, in 1982, Marvel started doing these graphic novels, these sort of European album-size one-shots. And not only was this the first one they published, but it's often cited as the most critically acclaimed. Now, what happens in it? Captain Marvel dies. That's it. It's right there in the title. And of course, we're talking about the first Captain Marvel, Captain Marvel, not Carol Danvers. You know, she'd take the mantle later on. And one of the really cool things that Jim Starlin was able to do was he was able to take these sort of like lesser known or unliked characters from the 60s and turn them into household names. He did it with Adam Warlock, he did it with Captain Marvel, and those guys alongside his creation of Thanos ended up becoming huge parts of the Marvel cosmic corner of their universe. They all became very popular all through the 70s, which made it all the more shocking that he chose to kill off Captain Marvel. But even more shocking than him dying is how he dies. You know, he doesn't die in battle with his enemies. He doesn't have a heroic sacrifice. No, he actually succumbs to cancer. You know, it's often said, guys, the best comic book stories, the characters that are the best are the ones that we relate to, right? A lot of these, you know, Marvel characters from the 60s, you know, we see a piece of ourselves in them. That's why we like them. They have real world problems. And in comic books, you know, that's always kind of hard to do. I mean, you're talking fantasy, we're talking science fiction. You know, it's often very unreal settings. But it's those little story beats, those things we can relate to that make those stories so important to us. And I can think of very few things more real than cancer. Sadly, it's a very ubiquitous part of human life. There's not many people on earth that will not be impacted by cancer at some point in their life, whether it's themselves, a family, a friend, a loved one. So this book here, you know, when you read it, there is not only the shock of, you know, the fact that this, you know, demigod, this powerful man or alien, is succumbing to this horrible disease that we all know far too well. It's the reactions by him and his family and friends and loved ones that is very real. You know, at first he's angry. He knows he's going to die and there's nothing he can do about it. But eventually he resigns himself to his fate and starts thinking about his loved ones, and he breaks the news to them, and they all react very differently. Again, we can all relate. You know, most of them, of course, are sad, but other ones, like his buddy Rick Jones, just go into full denial and they just, you know, get angry. And then, you know, all of his friends, you know, these other superheroes in the Marvel Universe, they realize they want to save their friend. They start trying to come up with a cure for cancer. They're kind of mad that they haven't tried doing it before, but all of them collectively fail. And all they can do in the end is just be by his side and say goodbye as he dies. It's a very harrowing story. Again, it's set in space, you know, with these, you know, godlike beings, but it is a very, very human story. And it's made all the more impactful by the fact that Captain Marvel stayed dead. I mean, we joke about comic book deaths. They're never permanent. You know, they always just come right back. Captain Marvel has stayed dead since 1982, and that mantle passed on to Carol Danvers. So when you read this book and you get to those final pages, you realize that's it. He's done, and again, makes it just far more real. So I know exactly, you know, what had happened with Captain Marvel. I know the story. I know he died of cancer, but I'd never actually read this book, which is why when I saw it, I had to have it. Cliff sold it to me for $10. It's a second printing. That's fine. I wanted to read it, and I brought it home right after the show, and I read it, and yeah, it's everything I hoped it would be. It is one of the best, in my opinion, you know, comic book one-shots I've ever read. The art's great. The story, of course, is fantastic, if not very, very sad. And I recommend anybody try to read this book at some point. Again, cancer hits a lot of us in many different ways. Parts of this might very well hit home for you. Only you know you'll be susceptible to that. But it's a book I would highly recommend you seek out. I'm happy I added it to my collection, and I think it's a very good one for any comic book collector to add to their own as well. So I actually got another book from Cliff. When I was standing there talking with him, I looked down and saw a cheaper book. I commented offhand like, hey, that's pretty cool. And then when I walked away, he actually ran up behind me and he just gave it to me. And the book is this. This is Marvel Tales starring Spider-Man number 201. It's from 1987. And as is the case with all Marvel Tales, they are reprints of older comic books. In this case, it's a reprint of Marvel Team Up number 65, which is the first U.S. appearance of Captain Britain. Now, I'm a big fan of Captain Britain. You know, he's an X-Men affiliated character. He was on the Team Excalibur for a long time. And yeah, I have Marvel Team Up number 65, and it's in pretty high grade. But the reason why this book jumped out to me, well, there's actually two reasons. One, like I said, that book's in high grade, but I kind of want to read it. So this is a great way for me to read that story without worrying about like compromising my nicer copy. But maybe more importantly, is this right here, Spider-Ham. So Spider-Ham, you know, the Spider Pig, they started printing little mini stories in all of these Marvel Tales books. Well, this is the very first Marvel Tales they started printing those Spider-Ham stories. So, hey, Captain Britain plus Spider-Ham, sign me up. So once again, Cliff, thank you very much for selling me that Captain Marvel graphic novel so cheap, but also tossing this one in. You are a gentleman and a scholar. What a nice thing to do, and I'm very happy to add this to my collection, and I have something new to read. So next up, I have a couple of cheap comic books. Like I said, I was hunting on a budget, and I found a vendor with boxes of $3 comic books. You know, that's lunch money comic speed right there, guys. I love going through boxes of cheap comics, and as fate would have it, this was my lucky day because as soon as I started looking, I found two books pretty much immediately that I had to have, starting with this one. So this is Marvel Comics Presents number 72. It's from 1991, and this is a story all about Wolverine as Weapon X. This actually tells the origin story of Wolverine in the Weapon X program when he had the adamantium grafted to his skeleton. Art and story by the awesome Barry Windsor-Smith, who I love. And listen, guys, this book could actually go for quite a bit. I mean, if you're a Wolverine fan, you kind of have to have this book. And I've seen it in higher grade go for a little bit of money. I like Wolverine as a member of the X-Men. I've always been interested in this book. I've always wanted it, but I didn't want to spend a lot on it. So when I found it for $3, absolutely, I had to have it. It's a book I've wanted to read. And it's in really low grade. I mean, there's a lot of spine ticks on the side. There's a little bit of water damage on the bottom, but that's okay. $3 for this awesome Barry Windsor-Smith Wolverine origin story. Absolutely worth the $3. The other book I found was this. So this is Adventure Comics number 432 from 1974. I believe the cover is by Jim Aparo and Tatiana Wood. And this is a Spectre story. So there was a pretty good run in 1974 of Spectre being in Adventure Comics. I'm a fan of the Spectre, and I've been slowly chipping away at this little Spectre run in this title whenever I can find it cheap. I had not had this book yet, so of course I had to have it. So for a total of $6, guys, I think I did pretty good. These might be the bargain pickup of the entire day. Pretty awesome additions right there. So next up, we have a comic book that you don't see every day. It's one I've always wanted, and my good friend Kit at Amazing Comics had a copy, and he sold it to me for a great price, and it's this. This is Pacific Presents number 1, published by Pacific Comics in 1982. And this is actually a two-part story. You see the bottom one here is Steve Ditko's The Missing Man. Sort of a goofy character, kind of half invisible, but hey, it's Steve Ditko. But the reason why I wanted this book is, of course, for the top story. This is The Rocketeer by Dave Stevens. Now, I think most people know of The Rocketeer from the 1991 Disney film. I love that film. Came out in a very formative time in my life. But a lot of people don't know that he was originally a comic book character created by Dave Stevens this same year. So originally he appeared first in Star Slayer #2, but he wasn't like the headlining character. You know, he wasn't on the cover or anything like that. He was just a story inside that comic book. He then appeared in Star Slayer #3, same story, not on the cover, before finally appearing right here in his third appearance and finally headlining the book. You see him right there on the cover. So I really love this character, and I really love Dave Stevens' art. He has a very cool retro style, very reminiscent of, you know, the 30s and the 40s, you know, lots of like kind of good girl art, that sort of pin-up style. But mostly it's, you know, that aviation aesthetic that he has. I mean, planes back then, guys, they had that cool Art Deco style. And yeah, that aesthetic I just absolutely love. I love airplanes, and there's nothing cooler to me than the Rocketeer. I mean, he looks like a living hood ornament, right? They joke about that in the movie. Very cool character. I've always wanted this book. I'm still on the lookout for his first appearance if I can ever track it down. But I was very happy to pick this one up. And it also reminded me that, man, my kids have not seen the Rocketeer, and we have to add it to our list of movies to sit down and watch as a family. I can't believe I've gone that long without making them watch it. So there you go, guys. The first headlining comic book featuring The Rocketeer by Dave Stevens. Very cool book. Happy to get it for $10. So these next two comic books I got from the same vendor, from Brick House Comics. This is a vendor I see whenever I go to CliffCon. He always has great half-price books. You guys know exactly who he is from the footage, because he's the one that had all of those amazing Golden Age books. I was speaking with the owner, James. He said he got some new inventory. He handed them to me because, you know, I like looking at them, but I definitely could not afford them. But I tell you what, guys, I started looking at these books. People came up behind me, started looking at them, and several of them sold immediately. The market for Golden Age stuff is huge right now. I think it looks great, but man, I cannot afford it. So they bought those books, and I started going through the half-price boxes. And I saw this book, and when I got it, I knew nothing about it. I just like the cover. This is Strange Planets. It looks like number 12, and that's all I knew about it. It has a really cool space cover. Like I said, the Golden Age books I can't really afford, but I like the aesthetic. I like space books. I like war books. I like horror books, especially if they look old. You guys can't see, but the top row of comic books on my wall back here is all books that look like this. So we had a price tag of $15, half price, $7.50. You guys will see I got it for a lot cheaper than that. I ended up getting this book knowing nothing about it. Well, I happen to be talking to my new friend, Alan, over at the Comic Collector Geek. Comic Collector Geek is a YouTube channel. If you guys haven't checked it out yet, you absolutely do so, because Alan has one of the best comic book collections I've ever seen in my life. And he also has an encyclopedic knowledge of all things comic books, especially Golden Age. Also, he's from Canada, so he's a super nice guy. And we were chatting on an impromptu live stream. We were talking afterwards, brought up these Golden Age books. I knew he'd be interested in them. And then I showed him this. I got this one, and I asked him if he knew anything about it. And off the top of his head, he knew everything about it. This is published by IW Publishing from 1964. And an interesting fact what he told me was that they bought old prints and, you know, plates from older comic book companies, and they reprinted older stories. So the original story in this is from 1951. However, they didn't actually get the license to print any of those, so they sort of published them illegally. But what they did do was they got brand new covers for all of them. And this cover here was by Joe Simon, as in the co-creator of Captain America. No wonder I liked it so much. So thank you so much, Alan, for all that awesome knowledge. Like I said, I got it cheap. It's going to have a prominent place on the wall behind me. I will make sure to put a link down to Alan's channel, down in the description. Guys, absolutely check it out. Sub him up. You will not be disappointed. The second book I got, you guys saw in the footage, was this. This is The Amazing Spider-Man number 344 from 1991, written by David Michelini, art by Eric Larson. And this book is usually known as being a key issue because it's the first appearance of Cletus Cassidy, the alter ego of Carnage. He appears in this as, you know, the psychopathic inmate killer that he is. He doesn't become Carnage until issue number 361. But lesser known, or at least lesser discussed, is that it's also the first appearance of this character in costume. This is Cardiac. Now, Cardiac, I think, is a pretty cool character. He's actually more of an anti-hero, less of a villain. He's actually a doctor, a very good doctor and surgeon, whose younger brother dies of a preventable disease. He finds out that pharmaceutical company had a cure for him and withheld it to make more money. He decides to become a vigilante that fights against, you know, corrupt corporations. And because he's sort of a vigilante, kind of like the Punisher, he runs afoul of people like Spider-Man and has variously been a hero and a villain. So yeah, more accurately described as an anti-hero. Now, he's still a pretty minor character. Not many people know about him. Why do I care about him? I've mentioned the Marvel trading cards from the early 90s. I love them. I like getting the first appearances of the characters in those books. And you guessed it, I have a couple of Cardiac cards right here, and it always lists the first appearance in the back. You see here, Amazing Spider-Man number 344. So I had to have the first appearance of Cardiac, and the first appearance of Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage, is a fun little bonus. Now, like I said, these are in the half price bin. Originally, yeah, this is $40. He had a higher grade one too. This is fine. It's suitably mid-grade for me. $40, and this one was $15. Well, James sold both of these to me for $24. I think that is a great deal for a first appearance of a character I've wanted in a great, great wall book. And again, I learned something new alongside getting this book. So a couple good books there from James. Really appreciate James coming down quite a bit on these for me, and I'm very happy to add these to my collection. So this last comic book is a very well-known one, very iconic cover. I got it from J&S Collectibles. They're a pretty big vendor down in Connecticut. They do Whatnot. They do, elite comic sales on Instagram. I see them all the time. I've seen this book before. I've always wanted it, never pulled the trigger, but I got such a great deal. I had to have it this time. And everyone has seen this one. This is Iron Man number 128 from 1979. This is part 9, the final part of the Demon in a Bottle storyline, which features Tony Stark's descent into alcoholism. One of the most famous Tony Stark Iron Man stories ever, and very critically acclaimed because, very similar to the death of Captain Marvel story I mentioned earlier, the issue of alcoholism is a very real problem. It is one that a lot of people unfortunately can relate to, and it was very critically acclaimed when it came out, if not maybe a little controversial. So what happens in this? The issues leading up to this issue here, Tony Stark has a lot of bad things going on in his life. He has a couple of very high-profile screw-ups, trying to just be a superhero. He's at risk of losing his company, I believe, to S.H.I.E.L.D. He ends up just, going down this really dark road. His butler Jarvis walks out, and, really just shows how it is a disease, right? They sort of adapted this, for the second Iron Man movie. Not really, but in comic books, this is something that defines Tony Stark for quite a long time, and it's such an important part of his history. So what I thought was most interesting about this whole story here, and specifically this cover, is the impact it made on a lot of people at the time. So this is written by David Michelini and Bob Layton, who did this very iconic cover. And both of them said that when, this book came out, they got letters from little kids who their dads were alcoholics and they hated him. But, they understood more like the problems he was going through and the fact it's a disease, and it helped them understand maybe like what their father was going through. But even Bob Layton recently, even like a couple of years ago, 40 years after this book came out, said he was at a comic show and a veteran walked up to him wanting him to sign this. And that veteran explained that he had suffered with alcoholism for years. He had been sober for a while, but whenever he looks at this book, it reminds him of his lowest point. And it's a reminder not to get back on that wagon. And he had Bob Layton sign it, and he said he was going to hang it on his wall so he would look at it and be reminded of what he overcame. That's fantastic, guys. That's the power of these comic book stories, even decades after they come out. And it's just such a moving cover. You can see everything going on in his face right there. So yeah, really happy to add this very iconic comic book to my collection. Originally, they had a price tag of $75. They had it listed as a 6.0, which I think is probably about right. It actually looks a little bit better than that. And they sold it to me for $60, which I think is a great deal for this book I've always wanted to add to my collection. So there you go, guys. Iron Man number 128, last part of Demon in a Bottle. Definitely a worthy addition to anyone's collection. So there you go, guys. A pretty good comic haul from this comic book show. Like I said, I had a budget of $100, and my grand total was $110. So yeah, I went over budget, but I think I got a great deal for that price, including some awesome books I'm excited to read. But head on down to the comments and let me know which one of these pickups you like the best. Definitely let me know if you've read any of these books, especially like the heavier ones like The Death of Captain Marvel and the Demon in a Bottle storyline. If you feel like sharing, if these books mean something to you or they impacted you in some way, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear from all of you. I love all the comments I get down below. I read every single one of them, and I always appreciate the interaction. So in the meantime, guys, keep hunting for comic books in strange and unusual places, including your local comic book shows. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.